So now let's actually look at some of the applications for sine and cosine functions. So we have the following problem. This function represents the forecast in sales, S, in thousands of flowers sold by a company during a certain year, where T is the time in months, with T equals 1 corresponding to January. And then they're asking us for two things. They're asking us to sketch the graph, and they're asking us to use the equation to find out how many flowers were sold in August. So let's look at how to sketch this graph. When they say include all appropriate labels, they mean include the maximum, the midline, the minimum, and some of the x-axis labels. How would we calculate out our maximum? Do we know what our midline is? We know that our midline comes from our D value. So let's look at what our D value is. Our D value is actually 102. Our A value is 65.3. And our C value is opposite of what we see, so it's a positive pi. So how would we calculate our maximum? When I think about my midline and my amplitude, how do I get my midline, which would be at 102, how would I find out what my maximum would be? How far away would my maximum be from my midline? We know that that distance between the midline and the maximum is 65.3. So we're going to add 102 plus 65.3 and get 167.3 for our maximum. So we're drawing in our maximum, we're drawing in our midline. Now we need to figure out what is our minimum. So we would do 102 minus 65.3. Okay, and we find that that is 36.7. So our minimum would be drawn all the way down below at 36.7. Okay, notice that it's not drawn to scale. That's okay as long as you have everything labeled. The last part we need to do is label our x-axis. Now, if they're asking us to do a 1-year period, that means that they're asking us for 0 to 12 in terms of t. Well, what would 12 be in terms of pi? 12 is a little bit less than 4 pi, so we're going to label our axis out to 4 pi. Now, how far do we go with one period of a sine function normally? Normally, we go from 0 to 2 pi. So our ending spot would be at 2 pi. And we know that for sine, we would be at our midline. But we would just repeat after that. So we're going to have another ending spot at 4 pi, again on our midline, with our start at 0. Now, I have a note down here that says, what will a phase change of pi do to a sine or a cosine graph? The phase change of pi, either positive or negative, will actually reflect the graph. So instead of going up, then back to midline, our graph is going to go down, then back to its midline, up and back. And remember that each of the 2 pi's is 1 period. So we will have one full curve every 2 pi. So here's one full curve, and then we will have a second full curve between 2 pi and 4 pi. So we have a double sine graph, okay? So our midline was at 102. Our maximum was at 162.3, and our minimum was at 36.7. So let's look at a bigger version of this graph. Again, we labeled our midline, our maximum, and our minimum. And we have 2 full periods of the sine wave because they asked for us to go for a whole year, which is 12 months. So our 5 critical points here, okay, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so 1 full period goes by 2 pi. And another full period, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The other thing would be that if we label our axis, because we had S and T, we need our axes to be labeled properly. So this would be our y-axis as we typically know it is labeled as S, and our x-axis as we typically know it would be labeled with T. The last thing that the question asked us to do was to find out how many flowers were sold in August. My little hint here is to actually use the table function on your calculator or to use the trace function on the graph. August is the 8th month, okay? So when we start as January is the first month, our second month would be February, March, April, and then we go all the way up to 6 being June, 7 being July, and finally 8 is August. Okay, so when we look at our tables, you guys should know what the tables look like in the calculators that we have in class. Here are a few examples of if you use some of the online calculators or some of the ones on your mobile device. So we would look here and see that the 8th month, or where x equals 8. Now, we said that our x was our t, but remember that the calculator only understands it as x. So when x or t equal 8, our y value or our s value is 37.3. Remember that way back at the beginning, this said in thousands. So it's not just 37 roses, it's 37,000 roses or flowers. Okay. That takes us to the end of the problem. And we would just want to write this in a sentence and we would be finished. So in August, they sold 37,000 roses. Always circle your answers so that we can actually find them. So often you guys show great work and we have to search for your answers, so just make sure that you circle them for us. Alright guys, that is it for applications. We might be doing some additional stuff, but for right now, you're good.